You're with Rest of the World News live from Tehran. Time now for the news review section. Stay with us. Welcome to the news review. Iran ambassador to the United Nations has called on all signatories to the 2015 nuclear deal to uphold their end of the bargain. Majid Taghlibanchi pointed to U.S. obligations under the international accord and UN Resolution 2231, which endorsed the agreement. He said not only the U.S., but the European parties must also respect their commitments under the deal known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. The Iranian diplomat says that the administration of President-elect Joe Biden must lift all sanctions mentioned in Resolution 2231.
Over the past few years, the U.S. has changed the name of some of the sanctions that were lifted under the JCPOA. For example, it has renamed the sanctions imposed on Iran's central bank. This is not our problem. It's up to the Americans to solve their problems. It's unacceptable for us to hear them say, we will comply with the JCPOA, but we won't lift these sanctions because they have been recategorized.
Well, the Iranian official also said that his country will go back to full compliance with its obligations under the deal once all the other parties do the same. The U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018 and reimposed unilateral sanctions on Iran. In return, Tehran announced a gradual scaling back of its commitments, citing the remaining signatories' failure to meet their obligations. Let's now discuss this a little bit and see what our guests think about it. I'll have Polina Veronas, political commentator and analyst, joining us from Paphos, Cyprus, and also Tony Gosling, investigative journalist out of Bristol. Good to have you with us. Welcome to the show. Let's go to Cyprus first. Polina, Tehran says lift the sanctions in the first place, stick to UN Resolution 2231, and then you can talk about any other thing. What's your opinion?
Well, actually, it was expected from the side of Iran. Is what actually Imam Khamenei has said many times, that if we go to the table of the negotiations, we need to have an issue to negotiate. And from the first place, as we have the sanctions, the United States, they don't want to change their position. There are not many things to be discussed. So United States are called by, all the legal representations in the international laws, or the human resources, from the human rights, in order to sit on a table and, having by a bilateral negotiation, bilateral agreement about the sanctions. And of course, when we discuss about sanctions, that they are illegal. It's not that Iran is doing a favor to the United States to sit on the table, but from the other side, we call a country that is hostage of sanctions, illegal sanctions for so many years, and we call Iran to sit at the table to negotiate. But from the other side, from the side of the United States at least, there is no reason to be negotiated at the moment, that they don't come and they don't make an offer to the international community, to change and apply the laws as they are. So we will expect this position from Iran. It's something that Imam Khamenei said many times. It's something like the government of Mr. Rouhani applied, but from the other side, we see that United States, they have to make offer of peace to international community, and for first time in the history, after so many wars and so many abuse of the international laws, many times in their recent history, to be consistent with the international laws, sit on the table, and in any case, withdraw from the sanctions, not from the agreement as they've done illegally also in 2018, but withdraw, for first time in their history, from the sanctions that they are applied to Iran.
Okay, let's go to Bristol. Tony, how do you look at this? Because, Iran waited for more than a year after President Trump withdrew his country from the JCPOA, and then he reimposed the sanctions unilaterally. So, go ahead, please.
What bothers me most about this is the way that the United States has shown clearly to anybody watching, which is not the Western mainstream press, because they never watch in any great detail. They just parrot what the embassies, the Foreign Office and State Department say on these issues, is the way that they have changed. For example, certain parts of the sanctions, they've just renamed them and called them something else in order to try and dodge actually what their commitments were in the original deal. And then they come and they say, well, we haven't broken that agreement. Well, of course they have. They've got a bunch of barrack room lawyers trying desperately to wriggle out of the things they've agreed to, and then they pretend to the world that they haven't agreed to them. So they're really insulting the whole world, and particularly the world's diplomatic and legal community, by trying to wriggle out in this fashion. It's a similar way, in fact, as we've seen some Zionists do what, I mean, for example, one of the things the Bible says is you mustn't keep pigs on the land. So what they do is they create these kind of elevated wooden sections and keep the pigs on there instead. It's not the same exactly, but you can see what I'm trying to say, is they're just twisting the law in order to suit themselves. With the JCPOA, what's at stake here is nothing less than, I think, a potential Third World War, because you've already got the Russians in the region. If the Israelis kick off in Jerusalem, for example, against the Al-Aqsa Mosque, just as one example, one place they could, you know, you're going to then have the Americans dragged into a potential conflict down there. The Palestinians, who are virtually defenseless, have been stripped of all their rights and all their dignity involved. And the trouble is, if you get the US and Russia in the same region, getting embroiled in a conflict, and of course the Israelis know this, they're playing a brinksmanship game. You eventually will get China dragged in too. So this could eventually lead to anything up to and including a Third World War. That's why the JCPOA is so important. And the question to ask Biden is, are you serious about actually rejoining this? Because the question seems to be often, isn't it, in American elections and many elections here in the West, where we get all these promises beforehand and then it all changes after. So is he going to rejoin? I mean, we've already heard just this week in the Jerusalem Post that Netanyahu is trying to derail Biden's attempt to rejoin the JCPOA. So whilst Biden and many of his supporters, the people who voted for him, might very much want to, I think it's potentially going to happen that Biden is leveraged by the enormous Israeli lobby in the US not to do it. Let's hope and pray that they do, because this JCPOA is as vital, as I've said, to prevent a Third World War. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Now, Paulina, you said that the U.S. should return to the JCPOA, known as the Iran nuclear deal. How can Iran be rest assured that it's not going to withdraw again? Because Iran, this is a multilateral accord, right? And the U.S. being one of the signatories. And this is what President Trump did. How can we make sure that President Biden wouldn't do the same thing?
When we talk about international law, unfortunately, there are no guarantees about what's going to happen in the international agreement. Of course, there are provisions, and there are provisions, for example, in this agreement as well, that Iran can ask for compensation for its damages, losses, direct and indirect losses, as we say in the legal terms. But for example, I am a lawyer, I am an international law lawyer, but in any case, even if we go to court, we can have some compensation. We can go and say that we have statutory provisions that they've been abused by the United States. So from the legal part, nothing can prohibit the United States from withdrawal. Because, I mean, we know that Iran is not going to take any war action against the United States. From the other side, we see that Biden is up to date and up to its declarations to what point this wants to take its hegemony of United States, hegemony in Middle East. We say at the point that the United States, they are declining in the region. That's why we have Israel that is looking for new collaboration. And actually, it doesn't normalize, but it's making official its relationship that keeps with the monarchies in the region since 1980. So United States, they cannot really support their presence in the region. From my side, I believe that Biden is going to sit on the table, but in a very reluctant way, which means that he's not going to say, I'm coming back to the agreement, but I want to have some official meetings with the diplomats of the Islamic Republic. So probably they are going to have some pre-negotiations. They are going to introduce themselves as well. And actually, it is to the benefit of the United States to act in a very calm way towards Iran, because we see at the moment that their power is declining. Russia and China, they are becoming very, very demanding in the region. So I don't see that even if they enter and if they withdraw, Iran is going to have sufficient in profit, or is going to have sufficient damages from. Right. I mean, what we have seen now is that And just I would like to mention something that my counter speaker said about the third war. I don't want you not to panic the people. We don't talk about any third war. We don't have any evidences to talk about any kind of war in the region. We talk about countries that, they assess their power, and all the countries, they assess how powerful is Iran, and it's the most powerful country in the Middle East at the moment. So let's don't panic the people. Okay. There is no third war. There is no war at all from my side.
Okay, Tony, if you want to have your reaction, go ahead. We have 1 minute.
Quickly, I think people were saying this in 1939. Nobody would do this. Nobody wants war. I'm afraid there are people out there, a tiny, tiny minority, the 0.01%, that do want war. They make money from war, and I'm afraid they also gain political capital and finance from the outcome of a war. So in other words, we're talking here about creating the chaos, and then actually, Naomi Klein has written about this in Disaster Capitalism. She's explained very well that there is a tiny, tiny number of people who gain massively from conflict and from even mass death of humanity. They can still make money at this. And so those are the people I think we need to put in jail before this is allowed to get going. But I wouldn't discount the possibility of war. We've seen it before. And although I'm not trying not to scaremonger, I think it's just so important to point out how important this JCPOA is, and how important it is for the European powers to make sure the Americans are not allowed to derail it, no matter what Benjamin Netanyahu tries to do in Washington.
Okay, let's hope a war would never happen again. Now, thank you very much for your contribution. Paulina Veronis, a political commentator, analyst, joined us from Paphos, Cyprus, and Tony Gosling, investigative journalist from Bristol, with their comments and contribution. And thank you for watching this edition of the News Review.